it over.
Thanks, Leslie. As she said, I'm local here. I live in Brockport, and it's a pleasure to do something locally. I get a chance to travel internationally, even not recently, but occasionally. So we're going to jump right in here. And this presentation I'm doing today, if you find value in it, I'm willing to share this PowerPoint presentation. I've also got the current ACA, which is the American Camp Association guidelines, the CDC, and a couple of related articles. You'll need to email me. I put that information in the chat. Not in the chat, but if you email me in the real world, then I'll have it. And it's a big file, so I send it using WeTransfer, but it's my pleasure to all that. Let's get started. So this session, connection without contact. I like the idea of trying to build connection. Some people tried to do that virtually last year, which was an interesting way to go. Other folks tried to meet in person when they could. One summer camp near Cleveland ran a program for children with diabetes, and their theme for their camp was 6 feet apart but full of heart. And that was kind of the secondary phrase for what they talked about. I think this summer, and this is a made-up bumper sticker that I created as a graphic, it's like a summer like no other. And someone was mentioning earlier that their numbers were filling up. I'll share with you, I have a friend who runs the YMCA summer camp in Iceland. And when they told parents at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, we're going to start registration, they filled the first week of their camp, 100 campers, in 33 seconds. And they filled the entire 7-week session of camp the first day. Parents were so grateful that there would be some element of normalcy. So what I want to share with you today is some concepts. And my background is when I was 13 years old, my 4-H cooperative extension agent called my mom and said, "We don't have enough male counselors for our junior camp, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. Would your son be interested in being a counselor at our junior camp?" And my mom was so surprised that somebody would take me off her hands for a whole week. She's like, "Fine, take him." And the next thing I know, I'm going to camp. So when I started looking at best practices and ways we could once again begin to build connection in a safe manner this summer, I kind of focused on the camp community. And one of the groups I work with is the American Camp Association that did a wide series of research last year for camps that actually operated. And I'm going to share with you just a little bit of that data and what that looks like in the group. Of all the findings they have, and I'll give you a little more extensive slide, they found last year for camps that operated that there were 3 dominant things that you could do to help mitigate the effects of COVID-19. The wearing a mask, physical distancing, and doing a majority of the activities outside in well-ventilated spaces. There were lots of other things that people did, increased sanitary cleanings and things like that, hand washing stations, cohort group sizing. They did a lot of managerial things with camp. But those 3, wearing masks, physical distancing, and doing a majority of programs outside were the most significant. So if you're going to do at least those 3, good things are going to happen. I discovered, for example, that some camps have dining halls, but they don't often have a way to socially distance people at 6 feet of distance in an indoor space without having multiple lunch periods. So many camps this year, and when they can and weather permits, have gone to doing meals outdoors. I know one camp, for example, bought a chuck wagon. They said, "We serve all our meals out of the chuck wagon." We got an ice cream truck from a local vendor who loaned it to us for the summer, and we deliver snacks around camp in the ice cream truck with the little bell that rings, so campers know that that's happening. Here's some of the findings from last year's American Camp Association Camp Counts 2020 research study for camps that actually operated in the summer. Last year, in the summer of 2020, about 2/3 of the day camps in the United States and about 1/3 of the resident or overnight camps operated. This year, about 87% of all the camps in the United States have some plans to operate this summer. We were talking about Camp Stella Maris here in the Rochester area. And I know last year they ran an abbreviated program schedule, and they had family camps where your family could come and stay in a cabin and participate in camp activities rather than running kind of an open enrollment summer camp. For the camps that didn't operate last year, even under modifying conditions, there were 4 dominant reasons why. Number one, some of them were prohibited by their local health departments. Some served a population of campers with vulnerable health conditions, like that diabetes camp I mentioned in Cleveland. Some were unable to get the necessary cleaning supplies and safety equipment that they thought they needed. And some just felt that they could not deliver the type of camp program under the COVID regulations that was the tradition of their camp. And rather than doing a different job, they wanted to wait until they could go back and do the traditional job. For the camps that did operate, they did a wide variety of great things at camp. Some had pre-screening events. I participated with a group of 4-H folks from Kentucky, and I had to keep a temperature check for a maid training for 2 weeks prior to the event. There's certainly health screenings, daily temperature checks, and things like this, cohort group sizing, hand washing stations. Some camps required testing. I worked with a camp recently where every member of the staff had been vaccinated, and every member of the camping population had to have a COVID test within 3 days. And they've been able to operate COVID free this summer for a 4-week session. And all this information is available on the ACA website. In addition to that, the YMCA and the American Camp Association work with the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and their most recent regulations came out on May 28th this year. So if you don't have the most current update, I would encourage you can download it for free off the web. I will send it along with this presentation today if you're interested. And it's worth looking at that because there are certain things, like within a cohort, the physical distancing requirement is now 3 feet instead of 6 feet, which allows some things to happen that didn't at the 6 feet of distance. But eating, for example, is still something where they maintain 6 feet of distance. My friend Jeff Marriage operates a YMCA camp in Nashville, Tennessee. And just to give you an idea, they filled their summer camp, and their waiting list before camp had even begun was over 1,000 names of people who were anxious for the kids to come to camp. And Jeff says this summer, the summer of 2021, is still going to be all about mask and social distancing and making good things happen. And I wanted to share with you current news that came out in the past week or so. I mentioned you don't want to be the kind of camp that shows up on the national news at night. And these programs, one in Texas, one in Illinois, and last year, one at a summer camp in Georgia operated and had massive outbreaks. The camp in Georgia ended up with over 300 positive cases of COVID. They thought they needed to run a program to serve the population of Atlanta last year. So Camp High Harbor ran, but one of the traditions of this camp was they didn't mask, obviously, during mealtime, and they used to sing in the dining hall, and that became the super spreader event for that camp. By the 4th day of their camp, they had to shut down and cancel the rest of their season after only 4 days of camping. This year, this one camp in Texas came out recently with 125 kids testing positive, and a camp in Illinois where masking and no vaccination or any kind of testing was done prior to camp. One point I want to make, and it kind of lends itself to this presentation, is early on, there was the phrase social distancing. But a good friend of mine who works on building community like I do said, we want to create social connection between people, even while we're physically distancing. It's the physical distance, the distance you can measure between people, that we need to keep control of. So you'll hear me talk primarily about physical distancing, but some folks use those two phrases as interchangeable. And to give you a little background from a former Surgeon General, one of the reasons we need programs like ours to operate this summer and run programming for youth in the communities they serve is that so many of the problems we have in our society, and there are plenty, you only have to turn on the news to see this happen, even here in Rochester, are made worse when people feel separated and isolated. For many of us, we've been through a traumatic year. And kids, I know at least 2 camp programs this year that have comfort animals at camp and a program to go along with them, because to some extent, kids have been traumatized. They haven't seen their classmates. They haven't seen their schoolmates. One of the most wonderfully terrible books that I've read in the last year is this one called The Lonely Century. Wonderful because the data inside of it was amazing, and terrible because it pointed to some really severe problems in our society that after months and months of lockdown, isolation, separation, social distancing, a lot of our social problems have gotten worse. Do you know, for example, that in the UK, they have a minister of loneliness? That's a sad commentary, I think, on the world around us. So we need the summer programs. And my friend Martin Williams from the UK said this about it. He said, we live in a time when the things we valued in the past, like socializing, playing games together, hugging, shaking hands, Even something as simple as physical proximity have become a source of anxiety and fear for some people. We need to reintroduce these skills and experiences, or they're going to be lost in the safest framework that we can, because these are the things that truly connect us together. I believe this is true. Summer programs this year are on the threshold to do more good than they have ever done before. And then what you do this summer, maybe not in terms of the physiological effects of COVID, but in terms of the social and psychological effects, I think what you do this summer in connecting people and providing a sense of normalcy for both campers and their families and the participants in your program, it'll save lives. One of the directors I worked with said, our kids need to learn how to hug again. For years, we tried to get them to share and play together. And for the last 2 years, we've been telling them, to stay separated. He said, we need to kind of reintroduce those things. One of the directors I know said, our campers are starved for connection, for that human contact. There's a book called Megatrends that was written in 1982 that talked about the future. And one of the things that it said was, in a world filled with technology, people long for human contact. I think you have camp staffs, yourself, for example, that are willing to go head to head with a global pandemic in a smart way and beat it in submission for the sake of the audiences that they serve. And that there's no chance for recovery from this pandemic until we give people a chance to reconnect. So my question when all this hit was, okay, what can I do? I'm kind of a team building guy. My frame's like a jump around there. I'm kind of a team building guy. So I looked at my world and said, okay, what can I do that would help this situation? And last year, when the ACA first came out with their preliminary results, this was a slide that really kind of intrigued me. They said that last year, for summer programs like yours that ran, the most challenging effect for both staff and campers, participants in those programs, was maintaining physical distancing. It was the hardest thing to do. Camp and summer programming is the kind of place where people tend to block together. This is my group, my family, this is my tribe, this is my cabin, these are my people. And people tend to stay in close proximity, sometimes just so they can be heard. But physical distancing was really challenging. Now, at the time, I said, I got to do something about this. And I started like this with a blank sheet of paper. I had no idea what I was going to be able to contribute that might be helpful. But last January, 2020, before the pandemic hit, in the bulletin board of my office right over here, I had written a little card and put it on the board. I said, one simple, beautiful idea. And my goal was that sometime during 2020, I would find this thing, a simple, profound, beautiful idea, something I could kind of latch onto that would be worthy of that. And at the time, I was writing a book, my first novel. I've written a few books on team building over the years, but this was the first time I told a story based upon a Canadian songwriter's song, the Mary Ellen Carter. And with his wife's permission, I took his 4-minute song and expanded it into a 44-chapter book. I told people it was kind of a long book. I said, well, by the time you finish reading it, the COVID virus should be over. Not quite true, but it was a fairly long book. And one of the unusual ship props that I own is a thing called the Dutchman's log. In the 17th century, if you wanted to measure how fast your ship was moving at sea, you could throw a little triangular piece of wood overboard, and it was attached to a long rope that had knots at set intervals. And after a certain period of time, usually about 30 seconds, you could measure how many knots were unspooled and measure your ship's speed in knots, which is a procedure that's still done today, although it's largely done by GPS. And I thought, well, gee, tying knots in a rope is a pretty simple thing to do. I've worked with ropes courses and things over the year. So that's exactly what I did. I took a rope and I tied knots every 7 feet. Why every 7 feet? Because the CDC at times said social distancing requirement 6 feet, and I like to exceed the specifications. So what I created as kind of a physical distancing tool to help people who ran programs was an activity rope that had knots every 7 feet. So you could throw this circle on the ground, people could stand at one of the knot positions, and they knew exactly where to be. And because it's camp, I like to glamorize my kind of accessory rope here. So I attached key fobs, napkin rings, luggage tags, anything that was colorful that people could kind of know this is my space. And then came up with a long series of activities that you could use with that rope. So it's a very simple tool. And what I really like about it is, um, that if the CDC guidelines change, and they have for cohort groups, you can just change where the knots are at or add different numbers of knots into your ropes. And it's not even something you need to go and buy. It's simple enough you can make this yourself. Some camps I know, though, are using things like gym spots, or they're actually painting the grass with lines like we used to do for marching band camp, with places where people know this is a space where I can be and this is out of bounds. In this next slide, this young girl is doing a thing called helicopter arms. So if you're in a group and you notice they're staying too close together and you say helicopter arms, place your arms out the side, you rotate a slow 360. If you happen to make contact with anybody else, you're probably a little bit too close. Whatever technique you're going to use though in your program to try and maintain physical distancing this summer, make sure it's pleasant, because you're going to have to use it a lot. I have been indoors with a group during lunch and mentioned we were going to go outside and reconvene, and had to remind them 30 seconds later to maintain social distancing. It's not a simple thing to do, but finding a technique that works for you and your program, it's a smart idea. And here's some of those best practices. And there's at least one new one recently, which is to encourage vaccinations for those that are eligible. The cool thing is, I know the University of Rochester is participating in vaccinations for 6 months to 12 years old. And the hope is that it can complete this, might get emergency approval so that before school starts, this can happen. So encourage vaccinations. Look at your programs and try to maintain physical distancing where it's appropriate. Use outdoors, well-ventilated spaces whenever possible. And wearing a mask, I can tell you this, I did a program in Kansas recently, and they wanted to be physically together, so they would wear masks so that they could, eliminate physical distancing, but by wearing masks, good things happen. And I'll just share with you a personal anecdote. It's not much of a research study. It has one data point. I went to visit my aunt who lived in a group living situation, made a reservation, went to see her. We were outdoors. We were separated by 6 feet. 2 days after I met with her, she tested positive for COVID, but we had been wearing masks and I did not. So I feel like mask wearing is generally a pretty good idea. In addition to groups like the American Camp Association and the Center for Disease Control, there are other groups out there that you might interact with that have guidelines for COVID as well. This series of charts comes from the Climbing Wall Industry Group, the people who build climbing walls, like the ones they have at RIT. And I like this inverted pyramid. It says, when you look at the activities you're planning for your program, one of the first things you can do is to eliminate certain activities. In team building, for example, there's an activity called the All Aboard. It's a wooden platform about 3 feet square, maybe 6 inches off the ground. And the goal is to get your entire group onto the platform. It's the equivalent of the 50s activity of stuffing a Volkswagen or a telephone booth. It puts a lot of people in really close proximity. So the appropriate idea from the Climbing Wall Industry Group is to eliminate that activity temporarily, not permanently, not forever, but for right now, maybe that's not the best activity. The next level is, can you substitute something different? Hey, what if we went to outdoor dining rather than indoor dining? We're still going to have the activity, but we're going to find a way to do it in a safer sense. Can you incorporate engineering controls? About a month and a half ago, I went to my dentist for a cleaning for the first time recently, and he had replaced the central air of his office with individual ventilation systems that went independently to the outdoors. He said what mask wearing was in the 2020, engineering controls and ventilation are going to be in 2021. That people are looking at that aspect of what's happening. Then there's things like administrative controls. For example, cohort group sizing. How many people are you going to put together in a group and allow them to mingle with each other without mingling with other groups? Most of the cohort groups that I've seen in the past year were somewhere between 5 and 15. And I think a majority of those were between 8 and 12 people. It's kind of a natural group size. But I heard of really creative administrative control recently. One of the summer camps I was helping with their staff training said, we noticed that at 4 o'clock every day, we had general free time and everybody had free time at the same time. So they would all tend to congregate around the snack area of our camp. So rather than do that, our administrative control was we changed the schedule so that multiple groups did not have free time at the same time. That way people didn't tend to congregate. That'd be a good idea. And the final level is to try and prevent it by sanitation, increase preventive practices, isolation, and things like that you might use, like mask wearing. Now, in my world, my grandfather and father and I are square dance callers. Here in Rochester, I called for a number of years with Jim Kimball and the Geneseo String Band. You have places like the village we have west of here in town. Just a lot of very interesting places that you can do some square dancing in the rural. But during the middle of a global pandemic, I'm not sure that square dancing is the ideal activity. Even if this was a traditional, cornerstone of your program, you might want to reconsider it from this aspect. Look at this group, for example. Multiple points of contact with multiple partners who were there, indoor space. No one's wearing a mask. They're not social distancing. There's a lot of reason to be concerned. The good news is square dancing is not the only kind of social dancing. Here's a group doing physically distant line dancing. And by maintaining a little bit of space, can you emulate the square dancing experience? No, but you can have a similar experience dance together. And that's when I realized this, that the goal of a physically distanced activity is not to replicate a non-physically distanced activity, but rather to replicate the outcome. You may not be able to do the exact same thing in a more physically distant mode, but if you can replicate the outcome, that's a pretty good idea. And in order to comprehend why some of our favorite activities, and I'm talking about the ones that you've done traditionally in your programs, that they need to be temporarily sidelined requires an understanding. I mentioned this camp in Georgia, for example, where singing was one of their traditional activities, and it became the super spreader event. So if you have a game or an activity that incorporates singing, shouting, cheering, or chanting, you might want to reconsider that. Close proximity, contact with other participants, sharing of a community property or a resource, or you're in an indoor space with poor ventilation. The important thing is, in this cautionary tale, all this is temporary, not forever, not permanently, but just for the immediate future. And let me give you a real example about what it's like to take a look at an activity and try to determine whether it's appropriate for creating connection and the appropriate guidelines for COVID. One of the ice-breaking activities I like to do is done with a thing called a raccoon, just a climbing rope that's been tied into a circle. And the idea is the fellow who's got the knot there, in a minute, he'll let go. And as he introduces himself to the group, the rest of the group use their hands to move the knot to the right around the circle. When it comes back to him the first time, that's once around the block. When it comes around the second time, his turn is over. Now, from a COVID standpoint, this activity is a nightmare. It's a shared resource, multiple points of contact, close physical proximity. You can see people are elbow to elbow. It's a large cohort group size here. They've been mixed together. It's in an indoor location. There's a lot of things about one of my favorite activities that just doesn't work in this environment. So I tried to find a way to modify the activity. What I did was shrink the cohort group size from 12 to 6. I put 5 people appropriately physically distanced in the middle, and the 6th person simply walks twice around the block around them. So the metaphor still works. It's a propless activity now. I got rid of the raccoon circle entirely. People are physically distanced. It's in an outdoor setting, only one cohort group. This works. And that's when I realized that there was no criteria available to help me decide whether an activity was suitable for real world in-person gatherings. How do I know which one of the things that I've done in the past are appropriate to do under the COVID guidelines? And so I put together this checklist. And if you can answer yes to 2 or more of these things, and again, I'm willing to share these slides with you. If you can answer yes to 2 or more of these criteria, you probably identified an activity that needs to be temporarily sidelined or modified so that it is acceptable. For example, I mentioned singing, shouting, cheering, or chanting. Does it take place indoors? Does it require hand washing before and after the activity? Let's look at a typical kind of team building activity. This one's called group juggle. The idea of the group juggle is you establish a pattern and every member of the group is going to touch every object. Again, it's a super spreader event. Participants are in close proximity and they're using a shared resource. 2 strikes and you're out. But some groups said, yeah, but we really like that activity. Is there a way we could modify it? And I have friends in Singapore. Now, in North America, I saw a fair amount of mask wearing during the pandemic, but I didn't see much glove wearing. Where in Southeast Asia, a lot of people were willing to use gloves. And they said, we can continue to do the things we like to do before by washing the resources before and after the activity, by wearing gloves and masks. So they were able to continue using some activities by being smart about how they did this. And what's interesting is that some of the new ways are even better than the old ways were. And I'll give you a real life example from that camp for children with diabetes in Cleveland. They used to tell parents, okay, registration starts at 2 o'clock on Sunday, and 100 carloads of families would show up, dislodge their kids, get their luggage out, and wait in a long line to register their child for summer camp. They'd wait in line for over an hour, close physical proximity. There were some real concerns during COVID about this. They told parents this year that just down the street from the camp, there's a really fun coffee shop and ice cream place. Gather there, and we'll call you and give you a 10-minute window when to show up. They would call people in groups of about 5. They would show up. The checkup time was much more efficient. And they said, you know what? We're going to keep that technique in the future and continue to use it. Let's look at another activity. Icebreakers do what I call silly handshakes. There's just a series of these. From a code standpoint, proximity, contact between each other, there's a lot of concern about this one. But I really liked the activity, and I didn't want to get rid of it and replace it with something else. So what I did was I went online and looked for as many non-contact greetings as I could find from around the world. And then I replaced the activities that involve physical contact in my silly handshake activity with things that could be done without having forms of contact. Again, if you really like the activity and you don't want to eliminate it, you need to find a way to make it appropriate. Here's 2 more examples of how summer camp staff and organizations modified activities to make them appropriate. There's a simple team building activity called the Marble Tube Pass, where you take a marble from point A to point B, and people have some small PVC channels that they kind of pour the marble in. This group, for example, you see that they're wearing masks and gloves, and they increase the size of the tubes from about 15 inches to over 6.5 feet. Now they can perform the activity while physically distancing and meeting the guidelines. Here's another one. A lot of groups have a low ropes course or some slacklining, which is happening here. And rather than spotting by having them contact each other, they use the PVC prop, which can be sanitized in between groups. And the important thing is this activity and this modification was dreamed up by the staff. They said, we like that activity. We want to preserve it. How could we? And by informing your staff of what's necessary, they were able to come up with a guideline. This is the perfect time to keep your staff aware of all the guidelines and then ask them for ways to modify some of your favorite summer activities so they can be used in an appropriate fashion. It's a great time to follow some of their advice. And what's that future look like? Well, here's an example from a recent Texas Rangers baseball game. In this view, you can pretty much see a cross-section of America. Some people are wearing masks. Some people are not wearing masks. Some people are kind of wearing masks. I'm not sure what that does. But in between, this is what you've got to work with. And what it comes down to is this, your comfort zone. How comfortable are you? I was just in Wegmans this morning, for example, in Brockport. And I can tell you that inside of Wegmans, I saw maybe a third of the people had masks on. Most didn't, including some of the service workers, because Wegmans allowed them in the last week to go without masks if they were vaccinated. And it's a question of personal comfort zone. Maybe it's a great time for some tolerance in America. People to make a choice that's best for them. What we're really talking about is physical proximity. How close do you want to be? Now, some programs, though, have thought ahead. I have a friend in Boston who is running a real world in-person event in April this year, outdoors. And he said, you know what? I know some people are going to have different levels of comfort. So he got these wristbands and people could broadcast their comfort level. If I'm wearing a red wristband, it means I like to keep my distance. If I've got a yellow wristband, I'll talk to you, but I'm probably not going to shake hands. And the green people are like, yeah, hugs and high fives, I'm fine with that. So people could self-select within the program where they were comfortable. What I'm really trying to do is take every member of your organization and turn them into a risk manager. You might actually have a person with that title in your organization, but if everybody is aware of the various rules and guidelines and can look for situations that might be a little risky or might need modification, that's a good thing. So let me give you a real world example. I want to invite you to turn on your video if you have it, and you can unmute yourself for this one. Inside this room, every letter of the alphabet from A to Z is present. So what I want you to do is scrutinize the room like you might scrutinize your program space for your summer program. In this case, we're going to identify the alphabet. This summer, you're going to identify things that are of COVID concern. And I'll give you a hint. The letter A is the step ladder on the lower right. Now, let's see if you can find some more of the letters. Where's the letter B?
Right chair.
It is. Keep going. Letter C?
Bookshelf.
On the bookshelf.
Bookshelf.
Keep at it.
D, chair.
D is the chair cushion.
On the right, good.
E is on the right bookshelf, middle.
F is on the ceiling.
Oh, good one.
Oh, yeah.
G is on the fireplace to the right.
H is on the lampshade.
Lampshade, yeah.
Oh, good one. That one's hard to find. Nice job.
J is on the chandelier.
How about the K?
Oh, it's on the floor over to the left.
And the L is right next to it.
Yep.
Where?
M is on the right-hand bookshelf.
Good. Halfway there.
N is behind the chair on the left, on the third shelf up.
You guys are good at this.
Goes on the bookshelf.
The right of the fireplace.
Right.
E is on the fireplace.
Yep, on the left there. How about the Q?
The
On the
Q is on the hearth of the fireplace.
Yes. R is above the fireplace.
S is the other lampshade.
T is on the ceiling to the right.
Oh, yeah.
U is on the step ladder.
Oh, yeah. Would V be those two books that are on the bookshelf to the left, second one down from the top?
Z is in the painting.
Oh, yeah. It's on the bookshelf, yeah.
W on the right, X. Where's the Y? Yeah, this one's kind of tricky. Look on the floor by the fire.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
there it is.
Yeah.
Nice, it's a reflection there. So that's an example of how you can get your staff to scrutinize. This one's a little different. I wanted to show you how simple it is when you turn all of your staff into risk managers. In the middle of my snowstorm, somewhere in here, there's a snowman. Who can find the snowman in this snowstorm?
Oh, I see it.
Oh.
It's above the second leaf on the left.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yep.
And that's my point. Only one member of our group had to see a situation and alert the rest of us to make good things happen. So when your staff is engaged, when they know the guidelines and they know the concerns for COVID and programs that operate this summer, and so that your program does not become like one of those church-related programs in Texas or Illinois that have massive outbreaks this year, we need to be aware of the risk and things that are out there. One of the questions I got from a lot of camp directors this year was, okay, so what can we do? When I first started programming as a team building professional, I took an index card and I wrote down 10 games that I thought I could play well. Those were my go-to activities. I thought I was competent leading them. I got good results, great things happen. And over the years, I've added to that list where now it's no longer an index card, but it's a 3-ring binder filled with pages and pages. On 2 of those pages, I've got about 300 activities. The absolute, it's the one I use on a regular basis. And from that list, really without trying, I was able to identify over 75 activities that could be used as is or with slight modifications that did two important things. They created connection between people and they were able to be used while physically distancing. And I put those together in a book called Connection Without Contact. You'll probably recognize the stick figure people that are a lot of those posters that tell you to maintain social distancing. But my stick people figure are having more fun than a lot of those folks are. If I had only gotten 3 activities, I'd have been a little concerned. And what I realized was most of you already know a lot of cool things you can do that with slight modifications, you can use this year. But in addition to that, and this list came from camp professionals like yourself, people who run after school programs, people who run any kind of enrichment programs with churches and like, this was a list of all the things that they were doing during the pandemic, either virtually or were maintaining physical distancing in groups. For example, one of the skills that I happen to have since I was young was I know how to make and throw and catch boomerangs. Now I got to tell you, when you're throwing boomerangs, you really don't want somebody standing right next to you. It is an ideal activity for maintaining physical distancing. There's another activity in this list that during the pandemic in Singapore became the most exciting new sport in their entire nation, and that was stand-up paddleboarding. You could do it while physically distancing. It got people outdoors. Singapore is near the equator, so water sports are popular in a hot environment like that. Paddleboarding became the thing that people wanted to do to get outside during the pandemic. And there's many more things here you can do. And again, I'm glad to share this list with you, but I don't think you're going to run out of activities anytime soon. In addition to that, there's a lot of books out there that can fill you up with ideas for no prop activities. And the nice thing about a no prop activity is when the game's over, there's no equipment to sanitize. There's nothing you need to worry about before the next group can be involved. So these are things that are available in the public library. You can find them on Amazon and other resources like that. And this is a collection of websites that I went to in the last month that just have innovative ideas for things that you can do to create connection while physically distancing. So you don't even need to go to the library for this if you don't want to. A word of warning though, physical distancing requires more space. Most of the summer programs I know first notice this in the dining hall. They simply don't have enough room to feed people and allow them to sit at a table 6 feet separated. There just isn't enough space to do that. This circle, for example, has 21 people in it. If that was the size of your cohort group and they're maintaining physical distancing, this circle is over 50 feet in diameter. And if they're also wearing masks, I got to tell you, it's hard to hear people. But if we were to shrink the group from 21 to just 12, now that circle is under 30 feet in diameter. And it's a lot easier to hear and be heard by people in a group of that size. One of the things too, I'll share with you, I wrote a book called Team Building with Index Cards. And the idea was I wanted to have a prop that was so inexpensive that anybody anywhere in the world could afford it. That's before I went to Iceland and found out that a pack of index cards was $9. And that's true. But in general, things like index cards are pretty simple to work with. So I created the whole book and all it had in it was index card activities. I put an activity in there called verbose verbiage. The idea is some people just use way too many words. If you've ever read Nathaniel Hawthorne, for example, The House of Seven Gables, there's one chapter that just talks about the way the sunlight comes in the window. And it made me feel, well, stupid because the words were like $10 words. The idea of verbose verbiage is things like some of the CDC guidelines were written by medical professionals and lawyers, and you have to translate them for your staff. So we're going to give you another chance to kind of participate here because I'd like to get some help from my audience. There are certain phrases that just use too many words. The first one example says, under no circumstances should you compute the quantity of your barnyard fowl previous to their incubation, which simplifies to a familiar phrase you probably heard, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. So let's try a couple of these and see if you can figure it out. Let's do number 3. It is futile to attempt to indoctrinate a superannuated canine with innovative maneuvers. Who can translate that for me?
Can't teach an old
Old
dog new
dog,
tricks.
new tricks.
Nicely done. Would you pick another number and let's see if we can solve that one? How about
Okay.
number? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Number 6.
Number 6.
A rolling stone gathers no moss.
You see, that's the idea. For you, it's simple, but for some of us, when they read the first one here, this is how those CDC guidelines read. When you've got a frontline worker who's going to be working individually with a group of 12 children this summer, you really want to translate those guidelines for them so they know what it means. It means something like when you come in to, have lunch, let's have everybody wash their hands prior to doing that. There's just certain things that you can help them to translate those guidelines. And here's the important thing. In fact, I checked this morning to make sure the CDC guidelines I have from May 28th were still current, and they are. They haven't issued any new regulations, but I will bet before the start of school this fall that there'll be new CDC guidelines. As the number of vaccinations go up and as the caseloads come down, things are likely to change. I like this phrase that nothing is written in stone. We all learned this phrase last year, and that's to pivot, to be ready to try something different. And what's that future going to look like? Quite frankly, I'm still waiting for those flying cars we were promised, but that hasn't happened yet. I think what's going to happen is this. Many of us got comfortable with the virtual stuff. In fact, that's what we're doing right now. We're doing a virtual program. You should know that prior to February last year, if you had asked me to do a virtual program, I probably would have turned it down. In fact, I have an email from 2016 that was inviting me to be part of a Zoom event, and I don't think I went. I was going to have to download some software online and hook up my computer. I just didn't go through the hassle. I never went. But now that we've had a taste of the virtual, I believe in the future, this is what's going to happen. There are 3 real possibilities: real world in-person gatherings, which many of us are anxious to get back to; virtual gatherings online, things we've gotten familiar with. For example, every Tuesday at 11 o'clock, my family gets together and we get to see everybody online. Aunts, uncles, cousins, whoever wants to show up comes there. We'll probably keep doing that even after the pandemic. And then there's hybrid or blended events, which have both of these. Could you imagine in the future, for example, going to a local conference where 80% of the people were present in person and another 20% were logging in remotely from wherever they happen to be? Those are real possibilities, I think, for the future. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to stop sharing screen for a second and just invite any questions you might have. I have a little more content I will share, but I'm just curious, do you have any questions at this point? And if you would unmute yourself, we'll be able to hear you. Well, keep
I
that
get-
in mind. Okay, yeah, please. No, Patty, what do you got?
So I was going to ask, should the plan for how I might offer something be part of the registration process?
I don't think you can over communicate, especially with parents and people like that. So making people aware of what they're kind of buying into, probably not a bad idea.
Thanks.
I think it's okay. Here, in fact, I'm gonna share with you this story in advance. What I want you to be able to do, Patty, is sleep well. And here's what that means. I have a slide that shows a surgical procedure, and there's this brilliant surgeon who's operating, and he's being assisted by an intern. And at the end of the procedure, as a surgeon's kind of finishing things up, the intern turns to him and says, "I noticed as you were closing up the patient, you used 4 sutures to finish closing them up. But the procedure on this activity that you wrote in the book says that only 3 are required. I'm curious about the 4th suture." And the physician goes, "Yeah, that one helps me sleep at night. It makes me sure that I've done everything I can. And by tying an extra one, I know I've got the minimum taken care of." And what I'd like to do is, here's the thing. If you're not sleeping well this summer, if you can't say, "I've done everything I can," and I just want you to be aware, I don't hold those camps that were attempting to operate this year that had COVID outbreaks in any kind of disdain for what they did, because I think they were trying to do a noble thing. It was a brave thing to operate. However, I'm not sure they did everything they could to try to mitigate the effects of COVID. So overdoing it just for another year or two is probably not a bad idea. So we're going to wash our hands more often. I got back from Wegmans today and I leave a lot of my food boxes out in the sunlight on my dining room table and I put them away the next day. It's like little things you can do that are there to help you sleep better is probably not a bad idea. It's a great question, Patty. Anything else before I move on? Other questions?
I just wanted to offer for Patty's question. I'm putting my enrollments on Google Forms this year. And before you get to the actual page with enrollment information, you have to get past my Google Slides that describes the program.
Okay,
go.
thank you.
That's great.
And I'll just do one more thing with that. Make sure that that slide has both pictures and words. Some people see a slide full of words and they just gloss over it and they don't read it. So, include some pictures from previous years or participants, something that's relevant. Because when people see pictures and words, they tend to pay attention more than words alone. Just a couple of thoughts there. All right, let's see what else is on the list here. I'd like to do this, and you can do this at the bottom of your screen. There's a thing that says chat. If you type on chat, you'll get a window that opens up to the right, and I've written some comments there. And at the very bottom where it says to everyone, I would like for you to write your impression of today's presentation, what we've done so far, in just 6 words. That's all. You can form a sentence, you can separate them by a comma, but you only get 6 words, but don't hit return. When I say go, we're going to hit return all at the same time. So for example, I click on chat, and I'd like to know your impression, but again, don't hit return. And on the count of 3, we're all going to hit return together. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. And they call that a chat waterfall or a chatterfall. And when you have 200 people, it just scrolls by and you get to see everybody's thoughts kind of in an instant, which is a fun way to kind of organize things. So see, you've learned something new for virtual programming. That's another workshop we could do for another day. So this was a slide that talked about that brilliant surgeon and what was happening. But I'm also going to share with you this information from a friend of mine named Tom Andrews. At the end of his trainings, he would say these 3 things. Number 1, I respect what you do. I think it's the very definition of bravery to try to run real world in-person programming as a pandemic is winding down. Let's be clear. Very few of us have ever been in a pandemic of this variety before. And none of us has been through the wind down stage to know exactly what that means. So again, we want you to sleep well, and overdoing it a little bit is important. I respect what you do. And because I respect what you do, today I tried to teach you the very best. I logged onto the CDC this morning to make sure all the regulations were current, that nothing new had come out. I knew about the various summer camps that have been having some problems this year. So I taught you the very best. And the third piece is, I'm going to hold you accountable to use this information to make our world a better place. It's not enough just to be aware of this. You need to find ways to implement this. And let me give you a real life example. There's a program that's happening in December this year that I'm part of. And they said, well, we've informed people if they don't feel like they want to be here this year, then they can come a different time. I said, but it's okay to encourage people to be safe. I can tell you that my mother lives in a group living situation. And if I wear a mask in public, I can visit her. And if I don't, I can't. Well, I like to see mom. So using those kind of activities and wearing a mask, maybe a little bit more than I have to, it's okay with me. It just happens to work out. I respect you. We taught you the good stuff today, but we certainly need you to go out there and use this. And it's not just the young people that are part of your programs that are important. Those families, those parents appreciate what you do to give their kids a sense of normalcy. Hey, if you'd like a copy of the presentation along with some of the other guidelines and articles that I have about physical distancing and creating connection in groups, then you can email me in the real world, not in the chat, but just email me, Jim Cain at teamworkandteamplay.com. And on behalf of the diocese and all of you who used some time today, I want to thank you virtually and in the real world too. These were the 2 books that I mentioned. Connection Without Contact also has a whole chapter filled with professionals like you who wrote about programs that operated last year. There's a great story about an altercation with a parent who didn't want their kid to have to mask. I'm not sure if you heard the ABC News last night, but they had to ground an airplane because a group of 10th graders on a field trip revolted and wouldn't wear their masks on board, and the captain turned the plane around and brought it back. So there's a lot of great stories in there, in addition to activities you can do. And this thing called the Dutchman's rope, if you want a physical prop that can help you maintain physical distancing, that's a very simple thing to do. I also worked with Martin Williams in the UK, and we wrote a book on Amazon now about games. And this one is primarily for younger audiences. I would say 4 to 10 years old, where some of the team building stuff I do is more for high school and adult audiences. This is definitely one for the youth audiences. And that's the story. So I believe after virtual programs, there's a chance for happy hour. So I'm just going to hang out for a while and we'll answer any questions you have. You know, I got to tell you, I've done more virtual programming in the last year than ever in my life, which I guess for a good reason. But it's fun to see your faces. The most people had their video on today of programs that I do. And as a presenter, I really appreciate that. And Katie, who was excellent and kind of coordinating this and making good things happen. Thank you. And I'll just open up the floor to any questions or comments, and we'll stick around until we decide we've had enough. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate you being with us.
Definitely.
If I wasn't here, I would be outside cutting down those ash trees that died last year and chopping them into firewood. So you've saved me from, you know, my fate here recently.
We saved you. I'm glad.
Well, feel free to talk amongst yourself and I can answer any questions I'll be glad to.
Anybody have questions?
I just had one, you know, we're talking about all these guidelines and we were talking about the singing and the camps and everything else. Well, at Mass now, we're all praying, singing, and all sort of together. So, which we heard was okay, right? I mean, so, but what do we do? Like, you know, I've still been greeting people when they come in wearing my mask, just because although there's not too many people, we still have an area for social distancing or for physical distancing. Thank you for that little, you know, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, you know, how much longer we should wear the masks and what we should continue to do.
Well, Jeanette, let me ask you, how are you sleeping at night?
I'm sleeping okay because I'm trying to be careful still.
Well,
I'm really trying to be careful.
Then you're probably doing the right thing. Like I said, if you have that nagging feeling like we should be doing more, we could be doing more, or I heard about a program like ours and they had an incident last week, just be aware and be able to be flexible, you know. The Delta variant is now the most common variant that's out there, and it's a little bit more contagious, and there's a lot of concerns about that. We are not out of the woods. If you look at the world average of companies or countries, for example, some of them have dipped, but like the UK has a 57% spike since last week.
Yeah.
They went way up again. So that can happen to us too. So, you know, I err on the side of greater safety. Yeah, I take all the balls that we use during the day and I soak them in soapy water and let them dry for the next day. I do simple things because it helps me sleep at night.
I think Jeanette, I'm sorry, Anne. I just wanted to respond to Jeanette as well. I think it's also, it's based on individual parish and what they are doing. In my parish, we are not singing yet. So, you know, it is different based on who you are and what decisions your parish has made. But I think it's important to keep in mind that we, you know, our little ones that
I know
talking about with VBS, they have not been vaccinated, and we're still wearing masks in school and they're very comfortable with that. So this isn't something that's new for them.
Right.
In the society might have moved forward, but our little ones, everywhere I go, I was at Mendon Ponds yesterday and there was a little girl in a kayak wearing a mask.
Right. Right.
You know,
And that's it, you know, I mean, encouraging it, I think, with the little ones. And that's what my concern is until the vaccines are, you know, I did appreciate Jim saying that we encourage people to get vaccinated. I know we're not supposed to really be, you know, saying necessarily, you know, our views on that, but I just think everybody ought to get vaccinated. So there's my, so.
Jeanette, I'll share this with you. I think
Okay.
vaccination is like the food pyramid. I don't think it's tyranny to encourage people to eat healthy meals. So
Right,
if I have a way that can help people have a higher quality of life and be safer, I work with ropes courses. We wear helmets. When we do an equestrian program, we have helmets and harnessing. We do all these things to help people be safe. I'm okay advocating for greater safety and what's happening.
okay,
And let me share with you one thing that was a really interesting side effect. Early in the pandemic in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the YMCA became the go-to location for daycare for hospital employees. They had to have some place for their kids, and the Y stepped up and said, we know how to do this well. And they did. They had trouble getting kids to wear masks early on. Well, they got creative people. They went to Joanne Fabric. They got some superhero fabric that was the appropriate kind. They brought in sewing machines. As an arts and craft project, kids made their own
Make their
masks,
own.
and then they would wear them. I have seen twice now with programs I've done where one of them has like the Amazon smile kind of on the mask, because you really can't tell when people are masked, you know, their facial expression, and to know that in general there's a smile there. So find ways, like here's an example. One of the summer camps said, well, we're going to have to eat outside. They made their dinner on the basketball court with tablecloths and silver and china, and they ate under the stars. It's like a five-star
Nice.
restaurant, you know. In other words, we have to do this anyways. Let's find a way to make it unique. And I'll give you one more example. There's a cancer camp in North Dakota called Camp Case, and they operate a summer camp program, and they have for years. One night, most kids sleep in cabins, but one night you can elect for your cabin to go to the campfire. They make s'mores, they tell ghost stories, and they sleep out under the stars. It's a special night, and kids look forward to that night. Well, they said, we're just going to open that up every night. It reduces the census in the cabins. There's less people in there. You know, more people can sleep under the stars. We're just going to do that. And it became a special event. So if you have to do it anyways, or if you think it's the right thing to do, find a way to make it attractive so that people want to do it.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great summer.
Thanks.
These are good ideas. What else have you got? And did you have something you were kind of speaking, but I'm not sure I heard you.
I was just going to share to the question of singing for our VBS. We're not getting new CDs. We're not teaching the kids any songs. We're going to pull out our old CDs and have dance parties. Because like Leslie said, the little ones, they haven't had that chance to be vaccinated yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a fun idea. They'll enjoy that. They'll enjoy the dance party.
Well, I want to be conscious of your time, folks. Thank you so much for being part of this. And when next the Diocese of Rochester needs my help, let me know. I'm just over here in Brockport, and it'd be my pleasure to come help you. But won't it be
Right.
fun when we can do this in person?
It would, yes, it will be. And it's good to know that you are so close by. So I'm sure you'll hear from us again in the future.
I'll look forward to that. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jim.
Jim.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for